When have you seen the real world hit a spoiled brat? Story 1. I was a school bus driver in the 70s, and during the height of court-ordered busing, so I ferried poor kids to the rich side of town and then rich kids the other way. Lots of entitled brats, but one stands out. Super entitled kid constantly defying rules. Eventually, I caught him, with too many witnesses, attempting to set a bus seat on fire with his lighter. School officials were called, hearing with the officials and the rich dad, and he's banned from all buses for the rest of the semester. The dad offers to pay for the damage and then quietly accepts the punishment. Then comes the surprise. Next morning, when I arrive at 6 a.m. to clean my bus, a regular task every morning, a rich kid and the dad are standing there. The dad introduced me to my new personal bus cleaner for the rest of the year. He brings the kid every morning and forces him to wash and clean the floors of my bus before taking him on to his school. By the end of the year, the entitled kid is actually working hard and being friendly, and we're getting along pretty well, and I help him out sometimes so that he can get on to school. Kid turns out okay when it was all over, so good move by his dad. Looks like the entitled kid got a taste of his own medicine. I bet cleaning a school bus every morning was not in his list of rich kid duties. So talk about a creative punishment. Maybe I should try this tactic with my own kids when they misbehave. Who knew that bus school cleaning could be such a secret to turning a rebellious teenager into a responsible young adult? I can just imagine the entitled kid's face when he realized he had to wake up at 6 a.m. every morning to clean a dirty bus. Serves him right, I think. Story 2. When I was working at a public library, we had a few local celebrities come in from time to time. Most of them were nice, but one of them had a real stick up his arse. He would complain about having to stand in line, about late fees, and about everything else. We would just say, sorry, those are the rules, or thank you for being patient, even though he wasn't. And one day, he and I were apparently both having a bad day, and when I told him that there was a limit on how many DVDs or video games he could check out at a time, he slammed his hands on the desk and raged, "Do you know who I am?" This is a grown man, mind you, and I was a little college student who barely looked old enough to drive. I was sick of this low-key bullying, so I just looked him straight in the eye and said, "Yes, I do, mister, and the rules still apply to you. Which of these would you like me to put back?" He was stunned. I don't think anyone had actually ever told him that the rules for everyone else did in fact imply to him as well. He was a little nicer after that. Not a lot nicer, but still. Story 3. When my brother was in school, he was horrifically bullied for being autistic, and his bully was the most entitled little crap I had ever had the displeasure of meeting. His father paid for boxing practice, karate lessons, and other martial arts. This made him think that he was the best at anything physical. My brother isn't overly fond of sports and prefers to read in the library. As the typical nerdy kid, he's a prime target for bullies. One day, when the bully had cornered my brother up against a wall, my brother finally decided that he wasn't going to take any of it anymore. But he strongly dislikes violence, and thus would not be fighting back. Instead, when the bully tried to punch him, my brother ducked. 3 broken fingers and a trip to the hospital later, the bully's father finds out about what was happening. All of his extra training and classes were canceled, and he had all of his electronics and games sold. And if he wanted to have a car, he would have to work for every penny himself. Story 4. I used to repair trails for the Forest Service, and I wouldn't call anyone a brat necessarily, but we're all pretty spoiled when it comes to manual labor and sleeping on the ground. On day 1, the bush plane flies the crew out to a grass airstrip about 40 miles east of town. Then you shoulder your pack, grab an axe and a shovel, and start hiking up the canyon, usually in the rain. Until you watch that plane disappear over the ridge, it's hard to imagine what you've signed up for. Hard labor all day, every day. Working, cooking, and camping in the rain, that whole first month. No phone, no mail, no roof, and if you forget something, then you'll just have to live without it until the road opens in July. Wolves and mountain lions circle the camp at night, sometimes bears come for your food. Everybody struggles for the first month. You'd see the kid who'd be the hard guy on his high school football team start to sit through lunch with the hands in his head, just licked. Guys who were in the 1,000-pound club at their gym slumped up against a tree all evening, eating peanut butter for dinner because they're too beat to cook. Demanding as the job was, it wasn't really a physical issue. The best workers on the crew were hippie Jesus types with noodle arms who read Marcus Aurelius around the campfire at night. They just took everything as it came because no matter what, it just kept coming. Them and the Mormon ranch kids. I don't know how these kids came up, but nothing brought them down. Man, Those hippie Jesus types with noodle arms sound like they were made for this kind of work. Who knew that reading philosophy by the campfire could be such good mental preparation for manual labor? I can only imagine how tough it would be to face wolves, mountain lions, and bears on a regular basis, all while doing physical labor all day. Those ranch kids must have nerves of steel. Story 5. One of my favorite things about the military is that in a uniform, no one can tell how privileged or unprivileged you might have been. It's a total blank slate, and for many, it's humbling to not get to or have to wear your social status on your sleeve. On my second ship, there was an E2 who grew up very wealthy and was a jerk about it. He wasn't afraid to let us know. He thought that he was better than his peers. There's a stereotype of the enlisted guy who thinks himself as an officer as a way to pretend that means anything. That's this guy in every way, and he would try to get out of crap enlisted work because he was going to be an officer. Probably even a commanding officer of a ship. So there we were a few hours into our first deployment, and this guy gets violently seasick. It lasted for days. I don't know if you've ever been around someone who can't open their eyes without yakking, but it's awful. You feel really bad for them, and it's hard to watch someone go through it. But not with this guy. Story 6. A kid in college was a roommate of a friend of mine, and he always was bratty and spoiled, but hung out with us as if he were a good friend, and we let him chill with us because he wasn't bad. Then one day we heard him arguing with his mom on the phone that he needed more money. From the ensuing argument, we learned that he had, in less than 1 year, burned through 30 grand that his parents gave him for food and discretionary spending. Mind you, he was not paying for tuition or lodging or his car with his money. It was basically just food money, as all those other things were already covered by his parents. He was calling his mother some really nasty things and then hung up on her. Then his father called and they got in an argument cussing each other out. And at the end of that call, he threw his iPhone at the wall and shattered it. This was one of the original iPhones. Turns out that they cut him off and basically he had to drop out of school and drive back home out of state because he couldn't afford to do anything anymore. And of course was too good to work a pleb's job. He added me on Facebook about a year later and was a late-blooming 9/11 truther. Obama was president by this time, and the only thing that I ever said to him on Facebook was a simple reply correcting one fact that he was wrong about in his 9/11 conspiracy theory. He then posted like 4 replies in quick succession telling me to open my eyes, and then he blocked me. Story 7. Simple and pure example for my part. There was only one coffee shop on my campus operating out of the library building, and it was always crowded. You pretty quickly learned that if you wanted coffee before class, you get there 20 minutes early, grabbed a newspaper, I'm old, sue me, and took your time. It was also funny watching incoming freshmen crowd the line 5 minutes before their 8 a.m. class and then slowly filter out in despair as they realized there is absolutely no way they're going to reach that sweet Sumatra nirvana in time. Cue this little freshman girl, dressed in the classic campus t-shirt, jean shorts, blonde ponytail, coming out with the ball cap starter pack, walking up, assessing the line, stretching out the door, and boldly deciding to just sort of skip it. Now, the baristas were usually pretty cool with people skipping for simple things, dropping down a quarter for some Scantrons, for a buck for a cookie, or anything that didn't require interaction. Not this girl. She caught the barista's attention, and while the previous customer was still paying, went, "Hi, yeah, can I get a latte, please?" Like, really quickly? The line starts back there, replied the now slightly confused girl behind the counter. "But I have class," whined the freshman. There was an awkward pause before the barista responded, "You are on a college campus. Are you freaking serious? Why do you think all of these people are here? Back of the line." "Oh," was the only thing that the freshman girl thought to say. And as she turned to look at a line full of people staring daggers back at her, she looked not upset or embarrassed, but sort of enraptured by this newfound understanding that she'd just been imparted. It's like the first time in her entire life that she realized that other people were in her way for reasons. It was actually kind of beautiful to watch, like a baby deer learning to walk for the first time. Better late than never. This story is a classic example of someone who is either incredibly brave or completely unaware of social norms. The freshman girl decides to skip the line at a busy coffee shop, only to be promptly put in her place by the barista. It's a funny and relatable situation, as we've all been tempted to do something similar in a moment of desperation like that. But I'm really glad, and it's kind of cool to see how it turned out for her, and I hope that it made her a better person in the end. Story 8. I remember this earlier today and was hoping that I'd be able to share. Not sure if this really qualifies, but it's a good one. So this gem isn't about a child. This was a full-grown woman, maybe mid-30s, who very clearly was handed everything in life. Spoiled, selfish, entitled, whatever you want to call it, she was way out of touch with reality. So I grew up in a very nice upper-middle-class area with nothing but houses for miles around. At the center is a small block with a little grocery store, a few boutiques, restaurants, and a drugstore. It being the only shopping center anywhere around, it tends to attract really snobby people. So anyway, I was maybe 14 or 15 and went to the drugstore to grab something or other and happened to wander past the makeup aisle. This drugstore is pretty large, so their makeup selection is huge, with every brand you can think of taking up one wall of the building. I had just rounded the corner where I saw this woman sitting on the ground just as I saw the manager coming around the opposite corner, making a beeline for her like a bulldog. He stops, arms crossed, and the following thing happens. Him: "Ma'am, I hope you know that you have to pay for those." Her: "What?" Him: "The makeup. All of these packages that you've opened, you have to pay for them." He gestured towards where I was standing, still at the end of the aisle, and I looked down to my right and saw that he was pointing at the pressed powder compacts. She had opened one of each shade, ranging from ivory to warm beige, and left the remains in piles at the bottom of each display. That's right, I said each. She went through every single brand and opened the packaged compacts. And to make it worse, each brand usually makes more one type of pressed powder, so there had to have been at least 40 of them. Her, agitated, was like, "What do you mean? I don't understand. Why do I have to pay for them when I only need one?" Him, having a stroke: "Because you've destroyed them, and because you've used them. We can no longer sell these to anyone because they've now been contaminated by you." Her, becoming irate: "Well, I needed to test them to match my skin tone." It was at this point that I realized that next to all the compacts were the used makeup sponges that come with them, as well as what appeared to be used baby wipes. Him, impending aneurysm: "Well, I hope it was worth it for all the money that you now owe us." This was about 15 years ago, so the remainder of the conversation is a little fuzzy. I know she was in panic crying and was refusing to pay, and then he threatened to call the cops. But I had to leave at that point, so I didn't get to see the outcome. But I do know that I did a little math when I got home, and nowadays one of those compacts will cost about $10 each. But back then, I'd say like 5 or 6. So she had to pay at least $240 at the end of that. Story 9. My ex-best friend was raised spoiled. His family wasn't very rich, but they always still really liked to try their best to get him everything he asked for and never taught him to take responsibility for his mistakes. Here's a list of things he pulled after leaving school. 1. Got 3 strikes on his license and lost it by running a red light, which wasn't his fault because there weren't many cars around. Speeding through a school zone also wasn't his fault because there were no kids around, even though he was going so fast that he would have been breaking the limit if the school zone limit wasn't in place. Getting pulled over and then one of his passengers wasn't wearing a seatbelt was his fault for not wearing it. And 2, quit his job because he wanted more time to skate. Did this by going to his ex's and sleeping with her instead of going to work and then bragging about it on Facebook. CenturyLink refuses to pay him because he's not even trying to get a job, and no place will hire him because of his track record. 3, assaulted a 14-year-old girl at a party. He was 21, somehow managed to get away with that. Also, this wasn't some massive drinking party, it was a family barbecue. 4, assaulted a bouncer at a nightclub and then assaulted the police who tried to arrest him. Spent a week in jail for that. 5, moved to Melbourne, then Sydney, and then ended up being homeless for a couple of years and is currently homeless in Germany. Oh, and I've remembered a few more. Another time he was skateboarding in a Hungry Jack's car park and a policeman asked him to move on. Not sure how it got to this, but he ended up assaulting the policeman and was taken to the station. His family had a friend who was a cop and then stuck his neck out to get him released, and then he tried to sue the cop who arrested him for assault. Also, he had a 15-year-old kid with him at the time who was drunk and high, so as well as assault, he was charged with supplying to minors. Oh, and another one. Caught a train from Sydney to Melbourne and didn't pay, though he got away with it until his mom got a $350 fine in the mail. He never officially moved out. She demanded that he pay it immediately. A few months later, his mom gets a bill for $960 in the mail because he never used the $350 in money to pay the original bill. His mother tries calling him out, but can't get through to him for days, so he calls his girlfriend, and she says that they broke up for a week after that visit and has no idea where he is. And lastly, also on that same train ride to Sydney, his friends abandoned him and he freaked out and got arrested. Story 10. I was out at a farm with my cousins for a party. It was more like an afternoon barbecue with all the parents sitting talking and cooking while the kids ran around playing. Usually a lazy afternoon in Africa. So anyway, I was 16 at the time, making me the oldest of the kids, and I will admit that I was all back of the bus, too cool for school type of cringy teenager and was practicing my casual aloofness. Now, there was this German couple there with an absolute monster child, 5 years old, who made it his mission to terrorize all the other kids. The parents of this little crap sat beaming with delight, watching their little ray of sunshine playing with the other kids. And eventually it became so apparent that they were going to do nothing about it, and then my parents told me to keep my cool and just ignore him. Now, which I did because I didn't want my parents in an awkward situation. At some point in the afternoon, though, the kid found one of those plastic toddler toys. You know, the ones where you can sit on it and push themselves around, but it also has a handle at the back that toddlers can use as a walker. So he finds this toy and is running around the lawn full speed, ramming all the other kids. Now, I did tell him nicely that it's not good to hurt the other little boys and girls, but he ignored me and carried out with his game, giggling and chasing the other kids. He also decided that I was now fair game, and I got rammed in the ankles and the Achilles tendon a few times, and now I'm fuming. His parents were watching and laughing the whole time. Now, eventually I am done with this crap and position myself in front of this small ditch, only about a 1/4 inch deep and full of grass, and I pulled up my phone pretending to read messages. I was making myself an easy target for the little brat, and he comes charging up behind me, aiming for my heels again. The front wheels go into the ditch, stopping the walker, and the kid was pushing it so fast that his momentum carried him right over the handlebars, right over the push toy, and past me. And then he face plants in the dirt doing full scorpion. There was no blood, but he laid there and screamed like crazy. The best part was that the parents watched the whole thing take place, and they and the other parents never suspected that I stood in that exact spot for that exact reason. His parents were kind of pissed that the kid hurt himself while I was watching the kids, but they couldn't really say anything, so they just kept the boy close the rest of the day. It's completely understandable that they were frustrated with the kid's behavior, but it's always best to try to remain calm and not take matters into your own hands. In this case, it seems like the child could have ended up getting hurt, which is never a good thing. But however, it's fortunate that he didn't suffer any serious injuries, and hopefully, he and the parents learned a lesson about the importance of keeping an eye on their child's behavior and making sure that they're not harming others. Story 11. I will admit that I was a bit spoiled growing up, though I didn't think that I was a brat. My mom had a maid that came in several times a week, and when I went to college, several things were very different for me. I knew to clean up after myself, but cleaning a bathroom was completely new. The biggest shock was laundry. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do or how. And I knew I was supposed to use detergent and softener, but I thought any soap would do and didn't know what softener was. I had no idea how or when to add them either. Reality hit when a campus security guard came in and I asked how much of the dish soap I was supposed to use, and the man started laughing. He did help me get the right soap after all and explained how to operate a washer and dryer.